Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first live stream for this course, Understanding Violence Against Women, Myths and Realities. Welcome, everyone. I'm Annie Donaldson, and I'm here with my colleague, Roisin McGoldrick.
Hello, it's good to be here. This is our first experience of a live stream, so Annie and I are feeling our way through this process as well. What we're going to do first of all is just look at some of the responses that we've had and just to talk to you a bit about what have been the highlights and the things that have been most commented on in each of the weeks. It's been an amazing response, Annie, hasn't
Yes,
it?
absolutely. We're over the moon and thrilled, I
Uh-huh,
would say.
uh-huh,
And so thank you, all of you who've enrolled in the course.
uh-huh. I suppose one of the things that's been really impressive for me has been the kind of atmosphere of support that seems to have been generated in the
Hmm.
discussions.
Yeah.
People have been very, I think, very courageous in sharing some of their own stories in relation to the reasons why they've joined the course. For many people to find out and to try to understand things that happened in their own lives, but also just recognising, or maybe for the first time, understanding how big don't buy your false teeth out of a catalogue, how big a phenomenon this actually is worldwide. So it's been really um, I think quite humbling at times to
Mm.
realise just the experiences that so many people have gone through and their thirst and their hunger to find out more about this. So I
Mm.
found that really heartening.
Yeah, and I think for me, the breadth of experience of people that have taken the
Yeah,
course, there are people there who are professionals in the field. There are people there who've been in the field for many, many years, and I've been really heartened going around in my work, hearing the number of people who I've been surprised to learn that they're taking the course. And I think people are really, as you say, they're very hungry for having a broader context for this work, and it's an issue that affects everyone in every country, but that they're willing to engage with that and to engage in such a mixed group of learners. And like you, I've been really heartened and delighted to see the discussions that have been going on, the way people have been learning from each other, and also people taking a step back and looking at their own lives and being able to get a context for that and being able to, and a lot of people have said how much they've learned about their past experiences
hmm
and they've made sense of what had happened to them through what they've been learning. So for me, that's been really heartening. So I would say thank you to everyone
yeah,
for taking part and for sharing some very, and at times quite distressing stories. It's a big step to do something like that in a public forum. So we're very grateful for that. So thank you.
I guess when I think back to week one and I think about some of the issues that we tried to raise in relation to power and privilege, and I suppose almost as soon as you finish an input or you connect another learning object that we've offered to you, then you immediately begin to think there's another dimension to this as well. And in some respects, it's a bit like peeling back the layers of an onion. You know,
Mm.
you see what the thing is from one perspective, and then you peel back another layer, and there are more and different ways of looking at the subject matter. Um, and I suppose there's the really helpful thing I think is that people are expressing all sorts of different points of
Mm.
views and are doing that in a really respectful manner because I think we were so conscious at the
Mm.
outset that this could be really difficult territory for many people.
Mhm.
It's been difficult territory. I suppose if we think about our journey over the
Mm.
years, the many years that we've been involved in working with people and thinking and reflecting on our own experiences and just trying then to distill that down into some of the inputs and making sure that we had links and materials that would help people to see not just their own experience but how it connects
Mhm.
to other people in the world. And I suppose some of the stuff about power and privilege are things that in our everyday lives we take for granted. We take for granted that we have a certain amount of personal power or agency, opportunity to make our own choices, but we recognise how little choice some other people
Mm.
have.
Yeah, and I was really heartened to read what people were saying. We were in week one. We decided to go for some big concepts, and that was the material that Roisin covered. And these are really big concepts that people don't often are not often aware of in their lives. But I think what I was delighted to read was how people were thinking about those things,
Mm-hmm.
reflecting them in terms of every aspect. I think for me, being able to create something that gives people a chance to think and to think in a
Hmm.
different way about about some of the issues and to contextualize the work that we would go on to in week two.
Hmm.
And for week two, we got into the nitty gritty of looking at violence against women, and we'll come on to the quiz and the answers to that, which I'm sure you'll be delighted to know as we go on through this live stream. But I think getting into the nitty gritty, I was struck by people's enthusiasm for looking up the statistics, for their shock at what they were finding, and they were able to go then, everyone has been able to go then and look at what's happening in their own country or a community of their choice. And I think for me, the learning about that has been very powerful for a lot of people. I don't know if you would agree with that,
Yeah,
Roisin.
and I think it's been um, helpful that, I mean, one of the questions that we'll come on to in a wee while is about, is this the situation similar throughout the world? And there are similarities and commonalities, but there are also quite significant differences
Mm,
as well. But that sense that it's not a particular national problem or ethnic problem or issue that's confined in that way, there's something, in some respects, comforting that it's an international issue. But I only mean comforting insofar as we've got an international perspective then to look at things from, you know, and it's
absolutely.
not. Um, uh, uh, so that helps us to see, you know, what are the things that we all have in common in terms of our daily lived experience, and what are the things that we can do about that. So there are, it would seem that there are different approaches in different
Hmm.
places, but we can learn so
Sure.
much from the experience of others and from looking at things from different angles at things.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the way that people have really been taking a lot of time to think about what they've been learning and reflecting on what's around them, but actually connect their own experience and the experience of others to that wider context. And I think that was the reason why we used the ecological model, because it puts individual experience in context and it shows how some of these differences between different communities and countries can actually arise, because we can look at the tensions and the way different countries have tackled things and the different forms of violence against women that can predominate in some countries over certain other ones. So I've got the sense that people are really grappling with the issue. It's a very complex issue that has a long, long history, and to begin to unpack like a huge suitcase full of material, it's difficult. But what's been lovely for me is to see that people have taken some of these big concepts and they're beginning to unpack them and use them as a kind of vehicle for learning in the future.
Mhm. So we went then from kind of broad experiences to something that was fairly Scottish. We used a lot of material that reflected the experience of Scottish children and Scottish women in some of the
Hmm.
video material that we used. And that's evoked a huge response from people identifying with some of the situations. But one of the things that really struck me about the discussion in relation to impact was the call to listen. You know, I can't remember how many different people said it's so important to listen and to hear, because I think we said at the beginning of week three that sometimes you've got a tension between not wanting to put shocking images on show for any kind of but rather to kind of connect people to the lived reality of what violence means, and the impact that violence has, whether that be physical or emotional or psychological violence. And I think hearing the lived experience of those women and those children has made a big impact on people. So um, I guess if we're thinking about Poland, some of the very simple things that we can do are simply to listen to one another when difficulties like this occur.
Absolutely. And that, we're aware that you're all, we're delighted that you're all posting questions and you've put questions in. And there's one here from Ailsa who's asking about what concrete steps can people take, whether they're as volunteers, as employees, or researchers, and how they can do some difference. And I think as the course goes on, you will see that as individuals moving around our communities at work or at play or at leisure with our friends, conversations are very important to this. I was speaking to a group of students yesterday who were talking about the power of comments and how it's important to think about what people say, and it's important to actually begin to think about how you may challenge it in a safe way. So be aware of things, and people are, once you're learning about all these things, you can become aware, you can put on a different lens that filters things, so you can begin to be more conscious of some of the things, perhaps in our pyramid that we talked about, where comments, sexist comments, those kind of things can actually contribute. So that's something that people can do, and it's important to explore in your own community. There are many, many organisations in most countries who welcome, such as Women's Aid, rape crisis movements, and other support services, who welcome volunteers to come and do all sorts of different things, and they can learn about how they can support victims, perhaps. So it's important to go and look in your own community to see what's available there, and there will be lots of things you can do, and you can join campaigns, that kind of thing.
There are lots of questions coming in, so let's try and have a wee look at some of the others. Terminology used and best practice, what things are preferred by people, victim or survivor. Sometimes what we found in recent times is that people want both of those words to be used and to be described as a victim survivor, having experienced being a victim but having come through that process, so recognising both parts of that experience. I think for anyone who has been a victim is a very non-powerful space to occupy, so people don't want to stay in that space, and sometimes people don't feel that they are fully through the process and so fully survivors yet, so that's sometimes we use that terminology, we use both words.
Yeah, if I could add to that, quite often police and criminal justice services use the term victim because people are victims of crime. So sometimes in that context, it's quite acceptable. And whereas in another context where someone might not find that. So these are contentious terms, but I think it's important to recognise the context that it's being spoken in. And when we work with police officers and they talk about victims, that's how they classify the people who are affected by crime. That's acceptable. But in other senses, a survivor. And as Roisin said, quite often you get victim survivor as the term that's used most commonly. So I hope that helps. So a question here from Carrie. Does the Scottish Government have long-term plans for increasing awareness of domestic violence and increasing the provision for those escaping domestic violence? In Scotland, we would use the term domestic abuse. That's the term that the Scottish Government has agreed upon. And yes, the Scottish Government does have long-term plans. It first developed a national approach to this in 2000 when Scotland's government was devolved. Not all aspects of Scottish Government's activities are devolved, but violence against women and domestic abuse policy is. And they have had a range of strategies coming up to date with something called Equally Safe. So there is a long-term plan for that, and this is a major priority for the Scottish Government. And there's quite a substantial amount of funding, although there's always a tension between funding different funding services. But the Scottish Government has a very robust funding provision for Women's Aid refugees and also for rape crisis as well. So the answer is yes, there is a long-term plan, and you can find that if you Google Equally Safe on your browser.
Okay. Do we ever experience people not taking us seriously? This question comes from Gitri. Do you ever experience people not taking you seriously because you are a woman researching violence against women, or ignoring you because your research topic is so political? We try quite hard not to be ignored, Annie, don't we?
Yes, we do. I can tell you an interesting story about that. I was lecturing to a large group of students a few years ago, and the lecture was being observed by a colleague, and I was asked, as I often am, many questions, very difficult and challenging questions. And at the end of the lecture, my colleague said to me, she said, Annie, I've never been in a university lecture before, when the students actually said to the lecturer that they didn't actually believe you. So yes, it can be very difficult, it can be very challenging work, but we always make sure that our work is supported with lots of evidence. And as you've been, I hope, learning, there is a huge amount of evidence out there, both qualitative and quantitative. So we usually don't speak and say anything without making sure we're backed up, because we're academics and we make sure that we've got lots of that behind us. Any more? Let's see. There's a question
So
from Nikki.
question from Nikki. It was really interesting to see how children in Scotland can be put on the Child Protection Register due to the impact of domestic violence in the home on them. Does this act as a disincentive to victims reporting? How does this work in practice? Can a child be put on the register because a parent is at risk, or does it have to be parental domestic violence and risk of physical harm, for example? This was a fairly recent change in legislation in Scotland. We have in Scotland a system that just a system called the Children's Hearing System, where children who are either troubled or troublesome are all dealt with as children in need of care and attention. So it used to be that in households where domestic violence was an issue, that children were sometimes placed on the register or sometimes referred to the reporter to the children's hearing on the grounds of a lack of parental care. And for a long time, people campaigned to say this felt like it was mother blaming in effect, because what was being said was that this child is suffering because of domestic violence in the house, but actually it's the mother's job to protect the child. So that changed in recent years, and to be a child who is in a household where domestic violence is an issue is a ground for referral to the children's hearing system, rather than that the child is suffering from a lack of parental care. There's many different viewpoints on this. There's a model of practice which we are beginning to see developing in Scotland, and that you'll hear about in the course, a model of intervention called Safe and Together, which actually challenges people to look at the domestic violence as a parenting choice, and tries to help people to see that if they perpetrate violence against their partner when their children are involved in that situation, whether the children are in the room or out of the room or whatever else, that they are actually actively making a choice to parent in that way. And whatever parents do in relation to their own relationships, in relation to their relationships with their children, is about parenting. And it's about the choices that they make. So I've kind of brought different things together there. The Child Protection Register is actually not a legal register. I don't mean it doesn't have standing in law. It's a device that's used by social work departments to identify those children who they deem as being at particular risk. But one of the things that being on the Child Protection Register does is that it means that you are given increased attention from the social work department. There will be increased visits and increased support that will be given to families where their children are on the register. But I think that change from seeing it being a lack of parental care to being an issue for the children, that, you know, this was not the fault of the person who was being abused, not protecting their child, but rather recognising that as an issue, domestic violence has an impact on children. So it was a fairly significant shift in recent
And
times.
also the focus shifting, as Roisin's been saying, this new model, which you'll be hearing about in a couple of weeks. This new model is putting the perpetrator's behaviour right at the centre of things. So it's looking at their behaviour and their pattern of behaviour, and looking at how that is impacting on the non-abusing parent and also on any children that are around. So it's very important to include them in the way. So quite often people talk about, well, the children they weren't physically abused. They only witnessed the abuse, and that is something that we would not think is a useful way of describing that situation, because whatever is happening, the child is within that atmosphere of domestic abuse, and they will be affected by it, and it may cause them some harm or distress. I wonder if we should maybe look at the quiz now and see what people are maybe keen to know what their answers were to the quiz. If you may remember what you wrote down. I don't know whether you do, but we can't talk about individuals. Obviously, we don't have any indication of who said what, but in looking at the questions, the first question was which of these are not forms of violence against women? And we suggested child marriage, human trafficking, forcing someone to have sex, female genital cutting, prostitution, prenatal sex selection, and saying that all are forms of violence against women. The answer to that is G. So all of these are forms of violence against women. So this is the quiz that we put. It was a poll we did in the week 2 survey poll. So just to refer back to that, so that you know, because there was another one that we did another time. So this is the quiz in week 2. So the answer to that was that these were all forms of violence against women. So G, and you'll be pleased to know that 87% of people there was 700 people took part in that, so 87% got the right answer. So I hope that was you. And if you didn't put that particular answer, then you were right with all the other ones. So the question 2 was who experienced 50% of all sexual assaults worldwide? Now, this was an interesting one because the answer to that was girls 15 years old and younger. And 14% of you answered that correctly, but actually the majority of you thought that the answer should be women between 15 and 24 years. Now, I think that's very interesting because we're maybe talking about sexual assaults, we're assuming there's an assumption there that it's mostly older girls and young women, but actually it's actually children under the age of 15 who experience 50% of all sexual assaults worldwide. So that's the answer to that was question B. So the third question was how many women living in Europe have experienced some form of psychological violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime? And the answer to that question is C, and that was 1 in 4. So the majority of you got that right, and I think that the other answers were bigger proportions, but I think 1 in 4 is actually quite frightening, and that was as a result of the FRA survey, which you had reference to. I should say that we'll provide you with full answers and sources to all of these questions next week, and one of the steps to next week. So the fourth question was, how many young women and girls worldwide have experienced rape or sexual assault at some point in their lives? So this is a very big question, looking at women throughout the lifespan. And the answer to that was D, 120 million. That was the largest number in the options that we made available to you. And most of you got that right. Over half of you got that right. Again, that's quite a startling figure to think that 120 million women have experienced rape or sexual assault at some point in their lives, whether as girls or as adult women. So the fifth question asks what percentage of those who are victims of trafficking are women and girls? And there's a great deal of attention on this at the moment, particularly in the context of migration. And the answer to that question is 70%. So again, the highest out of the 4 options that we made available to you. And actually, the majority of you answered that one correctly too. So that again, high proportion. The final question was about domestic homicide, and it was looking at the figures for England and Wales and asking in the last 10 years how many women were killed by men that they knew. And the answer to that was D, and 936 women have been killed in England and Wales over that period. And most of you got that answer correctly. I think it's really important to pause on that rather horrific figure. The figures across the UK suggest that 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner. And that is when people who are working to support victims of domestic abuse, police officers, support services, those who undertake risk assessments, they have this as something that's very much in the forefront of their mind because women die. And in the UK and Scotland, you can find stories in the press all the time about women who have been murdered by their partner, ex-partner, husband or ex-husband, and quite often children die too. So it's important to remember that we are looking at something which can be lethal for women. And one of the questions that's often asked when women are in abusive marriages, for instance, or relationships, is why don't they leave? And I think the main question, the main answer to that would be because it's very dangerous and many women die as a result of the decisions to leave their abusive partners. So thank you for taking part in that quiz. I think you did very well, and most of the answers that you gave were correct. And I'm sorry to say that the proportions were maybe higher than you expected in the one where most people didn't get that quite correctly.
Mhm. Aye. It is. Some of it makes for very sobering reading. But we'll post these for you so that you can see the answers and you can see the sources that support these answers. We'll go back and take a few more questions now. And there's a question that's just come in live from Graham. And Graham's asking what can be done to best address male attitudes as they create the problems that the course deals with. Well, if we knew the whole answer to that, we would be in a very good position. But I think that I think it's important to be positive and proactive in relation to this. Um, we in the very one of the very first inputs that I did on the course in relation to socialisation helps us to get our heads around the ways in which we learn the roles that we live. Because we learn them, that means that we can learn other things too.
Mhm.
And I suppose that gives me hope that we can teach other things and we can teach um, boys and girls to feel equal, to understand that human beings are equal to one another, regardless of gender or race or creed. And we have to keep that message going. So we have to teach boys that it's not all right to bully or to inflict or enforce their will on girls just because they are girls. So we have to start from a very early stage.
Mm.
We have to stop seeing boys as heroes and girls as princesses and see us all as human beings
Mm.
that have got different things to contribute to the richness of life. But given that by the time children get into school, they already begin to express gendered attitudes to things. Some girls get quite distressed at the idea of heroes being female. And so we've got a lot of unlearning of things to do. I guess we have to teach young people about respect throughout their journeys in school. Um, we live in a culture where young people have access to so much information so quickly, so readily, and oftentimes without any kind of filtering of that
Mm.
information. Not censoring information, but filtering so that children understand the context in the in which they get that information. Um,
I think also that it's really important for all of us. Someone asked at the beginning, what can we do? And I think it's important to note the conversations you have with young people and with each other. In fact, if I can tell a story from a student yesterday who told me that he had heard about an occasion where a young boy was pulling the ponytail of his wee sister. Oh no, it was another little friend, and there was an adult in the room who said, "Oh, he's just doing that because he likes her." So, what is the message that the 3-year-old's receiving? That if the wee boy pulls the girl's ponytail, that's a signal that he likes her. So there are very simple things, and fortunately, another adult challenged that statement, and that it was made okay. But I think that we can all take steps to reflect on how we are as males or females and how we relate to the opposite. And I think how we conduct ourselves with respect,
mhm,
I think it can start with the personal. And I think it can begin to grow. But we will be covering prevention
mhm.
and looking at different models of prevention and different approaches to prevention in week 6.
Week 6. So hold on there, Graham, and we'll go through some of this in more detail. But sometimes when we think about some of the initiatives that we've seen over the years in terms of reclaiming the night and things like the slut walk and these kinds of things, and I think you'll see some evidence of some very strong and good campaigns that are about preventing rape. And one of the messages that comes across so clearly in those messages that if we want to prevent rape, we tell boys and men not to rape.
Mhm.
And that sounds like a dead basic thing, but we are still frequently, when we hear judgments handed down, we hear precautionary advice being given about the ways in which women dress, the places in which women put themselves. Most effective way to stop rape is for men to stop raping.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to get across.
And I think the pyramid that we used in one of the lectures to just indicate just how comments and attitudes can influence behaviour. I think it's really important to recognise the importance of that and that we all have a role to play. And violence against women isn't something that happens to people other than us, it happens to us. The chances are, and judging by comments, most people have either experienced it or they know others who have experienced it, whether it's in their family or their social groups, or they're connected to it in some way. So I think it's a problem, and the statistics bear this out, that it's everywhere. And I think that by doing this course, you're joining, as we've said at the beginning, a community that's attempting to raise the issue, have a different way of understanding it and different a language about it that can help us to fight it, if you like, in the longer term.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question about, Patricia was asking a question about shouldn't services be more integrated? Well, again, you're obviously very keen because you're all looking to what could we do next about it, and we will be covering that. Some of the best approaches to tackling violence against women in communities comes from using a coordinated approach, and we will be looking at that in more detail in a couple of weeks. So thank you for that, but watch this space and there'll be more.
Tricia asks a question about why is there not a public health campaign on TV that acknowledges and raises awareness of the issues and that highlights exactly the steps to be taken in order to leave safely and to get support. And Tricia, you say that you don't recall seeing such a campaign. Well, there have been campaigns from time to time. In commercial television, sometimes there have been public health adverts that have quite graphically displayed issues of domestic abuse, person coming home from work and throwing food, smashing plates, children being afraid, women trying to appease. So there have been public campaigns in the past. And very recently, and we did use this piece of film. I thought that might have been in week 3, but perhaps it's a later one to come. Women's Aid in England have produced a very short, it's seconds, less than a minute campaign that has in it a very prominent actress who plays the part of a grandmother. And there's a scene where the family are having dinner together and her adult daughter asks her if she's okay. And she says, yes, of course. And at different points in that film, it shows you the woman taking steps to disguise by use of makeup the bruising on her face. And when her family leave, she's then subjected to another quite vicious attack. So that's doing the rounds on social media just now, created by Women's Aid. There are campaigns there.
It depends what country, I suppose.
Yeah,
I mean, we're speaking about in the UK and also Scotland, where there have been, and we will be talking in a couple of weeks about the Zero Tolerance campaign, which kind of started this. But it might be worthwhile looking at in your own country or community to see if there are any campaigns available. There's an international poster exhibition which has been running for a number of years, put together by a man called Colm Dempsey, and he has gathered up examples of posters and videos made across the world, and it just shows you the range of materials that are available and the different angles that different countries actually take to tackling the problem in their community. So every community will have a different approach because they'll be wishing to send out different messages perhaps, but it might be worthwhile. We don't know, Tricia, where you are, but it may be worthwhile having a look to see what's available in your country. And maybe some countries are more, it's more common in some countries than it is in others.
Mm-hmm. There's a wee bit in your question, Tricia, that says campaign should highlight exactly the steps to be taken in order to leave safely. And I think it's quite difficult to be prescriptive. In every situation, there will be barriers and facilitators to women leaving, and so it's quite difficult to say these are the steps that you have to take. And oftentimes public health professionals, health visitors, social workers, GPs, teachers might be able to play different parts in the lives of people who are seeking to leave but are perhaps afraid to do so, don't know how to do so. So sometimes it's about very good signposting, and sometimes it's about just being alongside somebody until they're ready
Yeah.
to go. Because oftentimes we might think this situation's intolerable. Why doesn't that woman get out of there? And here's what she can do to get out of there. But it's a very complex decision for someone to take, to uproot their children, to leave their home, to become homeless, to go into refuge. And so we have to tailor the help that we give people to meet their particular needs at any given time.
Yeah. And I think I would just add that to what Roisin was saying, I think it's really important that to be a good listening ear and to be supportive and not to be judging when people are disclosing to you. And even if it's a friend, be supportive and be patient with them and be empathetic to what's going on because it is a very complex situation.
Mm-hmm. There's a wee question about how can we get more involved, and again that will be kind of locality specific. Do you know, you can be involved, as Annie says, by just being a listening ear for people, but you can actually check in your doctor's surgery, your dentist surgery, your hairdressers, all sorts of different places. You may well see credit card sized cards that give telephone numbers. Some of the organisations that we have worked with here in Glasgow, in Rape Crisis and in Women's Aid, are desperate for volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we'll give you training. So, because sometimes people will say, I'd like to volunteer, but I don't think I've got the skills or I don't know what to do. But both of those organisations and many others besides offer training. They're not going to catapult you into a situation that you think is beyond your ken. Many of the women who are helped by volunteers as well as by professionals really, really value the ordinariness of the person who's helping them, the person who is simply finds these kinds of situations intolerable and wants to just get alongside somebody and help. So you don't need to have a specific skill set. You need to have a willingness, you know, and want to help and to contact your local Women's Aid branch. The numbers are very readily accessible. So that's one way of getting involved. And I think
I'd also add to that that if you're in employment, it might be worth asking your personnel or human resources department if they have a policy. How does your employer support people who are affected by gender-based violence against women or domestic abuse? If you're in an organisation, maybe you're a community activist, it may be worth asking the group that you're involved in, is this an issue that we are taking forward? There's a lot of activist movements around the world who would be, I'm sure, quite happy to consider that. So how is it treated? Is it an issue in your community? So it may be a bit of research is required actually to go and have a look, but there are many ways of getting involved. And actually, things like the 1 Billion Rising, communities across the world took part in that. Small communities, small groups of people, large groups of people. There's something called the 16 Days of Activism Against Violence Against Women, and that happens every year from 25th of November to the 10th of December, and there's usually lots and lots of activities going on. So you might like to Google those terms and find out what's going on in your local area.
So if you see people wearing white ribbons at that time of year, that's what that signifies, the 16 days of action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's one more question from Jackie. The figure of 1 to 4 has been around for years. We don't seem to be making any inroads to reduce the number. Is the best we can do damage limitation and support? And what do we think of that? I think that damage limitation to me would be risk assessment and managing risk. I agree with you that the term 1 in 4 has been around for a long, long time, and that just shows you how difficult a challenge this is. And I think that the efforts that are being made, and I think this course is part of that, is to raise awareness and let people understand that it is still a common thing. It happens to everybody, and there needs to be more of a general swell within the populations of local communities to challenge it. But we do understand the difficulties of that too. But hopefully, knowledge helps to actually galvanize people. And if you've got the facts and figures at your fingertips and you understand the realities of living with that, then I think that you can we can put a lot of effort into it. And hopefully, as you go through the course, you will be heartened to find that there is a lot of really excellent work going out there. And I would say that everyone taking part in this course is part of that.
Mhm.
So I think that's what I think. So I hope that's an answer, and maybe we can have a discussion about that in
Mhm.
a couple of weeks' time.
Absolutely. We've had a huge number of questions and we've had to be quite judicious in picking a few out here. So I hope we've addressed some of the
Mm.
issues that are exercising many of you as you're doing the course. We have to wrap up now, but we want to encourage you to continue to participate at the level that you're doing, because it's really amazing and very, very encouraging to know that people are as engaged as you all are in the course. Um,
And it's been lovely to actually talk live with you, although we
uh-huh.
chip in and comment on the discussions. But it's been really nice to engage with you, and we hope you've enjoyed this. And we hope that there are many more questions that you can put into the discussion, and we'll be happy to continue that with you. So thank you very much, and we hope you have a nice weekend,
Mhm.
whatever you're doing.
Okay, goodbye from Glasgow.
Bye
Bye.
bye.